The town of Dry Creek was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. Dust rolled across the wooden planks of Main Street, wagons rattled by with weary horses, and townsfolk went about their routines with the slow rhythm of survival. Yet behind the stillness, every shadow seemed to carry secrets, and in one of the weather-beaten barns at the edge of town, a little girl named Emily Rose stumbled upon a secret that would turn her small world upside down. Emily was only 10, with curious eyes that never stopped searching. She lived with her widowed mother, Clara, in a modest ranch house left behind by her late father. Clara often warned her daughter not to wander too far, especially into the old barn where memories of the past lingered like ghosts. But children rarely listen to the rules that protect them. On a warm summer afternoon, when the sun glared down like molten fire and the crickets sang in the tall grass, Emily slipped into the barn. The air was heavy with the smell of hay and old leather. Shafts of light streamed in through the cracked boards, illuminating dust that floated like tiny stars. She had come chasing a stray kitten, but what she found was something far more dangerous. In the corner, half buried beneath a stack of brittle saddles, was a saddlebag unlike the others. The leather was darker, worn smooth from years of handling. Its buckles were rusted, and one flap was stitched with a strange symbol, a cross carved through with a dagger. Emily frowned. She had never seen this saddlebag before, though she had played in the barn countless times. With her small hands she tugged it free, the weight of it surprising her. It wasn't heavy with grain or tools. It carried something else. Her heart thumped as she pulled open the flap. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth yellowed with age, was a folded sheet of parchment. She unrolled it carefully, her breath catching when she saw what lay before her. A hand-drawn map, its lines curling like rivers across faded paper. Landmarks she recognized, the hills beyond Dry Creek, the winding river, the canyon to the west. But there were also strange markings she couldn't understand, symbols like stars, arrows pointing towards something hidden deep in the desert. Emily's hands trembled. Her child's imagination is powerful, and in that moment she pictured buried treasure, secret hideouts, or perhaps even a path her father had once walked. She pressed the parchment to her chest, torn between excitement and fear. That was when Clara's voice called from outside, sharp and worried. "Emily, where are you? Dinner's getting cold." Emily quickly shoved the map back into the saddlebag and dragged it behind a barrel before running to her mother. At the table, while Clara ladled out stew, Emily's mind stayed in the barn, replaying the strange symbols, the way the parchment smelled of earth and gunpowder. Later that night, when the crickets quieted, and only the wind sighed through the cracks of their little house, Emily crept from her bed. She carried a lantern and tiptoed into the barn again. She wanted another look, to be sure she hadn't imagined it. This time she spread the map on the floor, tracing the ink with her fingertip. In the corner was a signature, faint but readable, J.R., her father's initials. Tears welled in her eyes. She had been too young to understand much when her father died, but she remembered his strong hands, the smell of leather and tobacco, and his promise that he'd always keep them safe. Had he drawn this? Was this his secret? Emily's world shifted in that instant. The map wasn't just old paper. It was a message from her father, left behind like a whisper from the grave. Suddenly a noise outside made her jump. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, crunching against the dirt road. She hurried to the window of the barn and peered out into the moonlit night. A horse stood near the fence, its breath rising in misty clouds. And sitting tall in the saddle was a man every child in Dry Creek knew by sight, Sheriff Elias McGraw. His hat shadowed his face, but even in the dim light his eyes glinted cold and watchful. He wasn't looking at the house. He was staring directly at the barn. Directly at her, Emily's blood ran cold. She dropped the lantern's flame low and crouched behind a bale of hay, clutching the map against her chest. The sheriff's presence at this hour was no coincidence. He was waiting, watching, as though he knew exactly what lay hidden in the saddlebag. Minutes crawled by. Finally, the sheriff tugged on his reins and turned his horse away, disappearing into the night. But Emily knew in her bones he would be back. He wanted the map. She hurried back to the house, slipping under her blanket, though sleep never came. Her thoughts raced with fear and wonder. Why would the sheriff want something her father had left behind? And why did he look at the barn as if he already knew where to search? In the darkness, Emily whispered to herself, her voice trembling but determined, "I won't let him take it. Not father's secret. Not ever." And so began the journey that would test the courage of a little girl against the greed of powerful men, a journey that started with a single map in a saddlebag, and a sheriff who would stop at nothing to claim it. Morning light spilled over Dry Creek, painting the town in shades of gold and red. Wagons rattled down Main Street, the blacksmith hammered iron and merchants hollered their prices. Life looked ordinary, yet Emily felt a knot in her stomach. She hadn't forgotten the way Sheriff McGraw's eyes had glowed in the moonlight, fixed on the barn, as though he had seen straight through the walls. At the breakfast table, Clara noticed her daughter's quietness. "You hardly touched your bread," Clara said gently. Emily shrugged, trying not to meet her mother's gaze. Just not hungry, but her mother's eyes narrowed with worry. Clara had lived through loss, hardship, and secrets. She could sense when something troubled her child. Yet Emily kept silent. She didn't want to frighten her mother with tales of shadows and maps. Later that day, the sound of heavy boots creaked across their porch. A knock, sharp and commanding, echoed through the small house. Clara wiped her hands nervously on her apron before opening the door. There he was, Sheriff Elias McGraw, tall and broad, his badge glinting in the morning sun. He wore his authority like a second skin, his voice smooth yet edged with steel. "Morning, Miss Clara," he drawled. "I was just riding through, thought I'd check in on you and little Emily." Emily froze at the mention of her name. The sheriff tipped his hat at her through the doorway, his smile too wide, his eyes too calculating. "Such a fine girl you're raising," he said. Smart, curious. Like her father was, Clara stiffened. The mention of her husband was a knife turned in an old wound. "What do you want, Sheriff?" she asked, her voice firm but strained. McGraw chuckled. "Now don't be like that. Just a neighborly visit. Folks say they've seen strangers snooping around the edges of town. Best I make sure you're safe." Emily's chest tightened. She remembered the saddlebag hidden in the barn, the map folded beneath her pillow last night. The sheriff wasn't here out of kindness. He was hunting. He stepped inside uninvited, boots thudding against the wooden floor. His gaze swept the modest home, lingering on every corner as if searching for something. Emily hugged her knees, willing herself invisible. Finally, McGraw's eyes fell on her. "Emily," he said softly, crouching down so his shadow loomed across her face. "You know your father once did work for me, don't you?" Emily shook her head quickly, though she remembered whispers, half-heard conversations between adults when they thought she wasn't listening. The sheriff smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "He was a good man, your pa. Knew the land better than anyone. Drew maps, left notes. Valuable things. Things that shouldn't be lying around where just anyone might find them." Emily's breath caught, her small fingers clutching the hem of her dress. Did he know? Could he somehow see the folded parchment hidden in her room? Clara stepped between them, her voice sharp. "That's enough, Sheriff. If you've no proper business here, I'd ask you to leave." For a moment, tension hung thick in the air. McGraw rose slowly, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Then he tipped his hat again, his grin stretched like leather. "Of course, Miss Clara, didn't mean to upset you. Just keep an eye out. A lot of dangerous folks looking for things that don't belong to them." His gaze flickered back to Emily, a silent warning. Be a shame if someone got hurt over a scrap of old paper. With that he left, boots echoing off the porch, spurs jingling as he mounted his horse. The sound of hooves faded down the road, but his presence lingered like smoke in the air. Clara turned to her daughter. "Emily, what have you done?" Emily's lips trembled. She wanted to confess everything, about the saddlebag, the map, the sheriff staring at the barn. But fear sealed her words. She shook her head, whispering, "Nothing, Mama, I promise." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like the sheriff returning. She clutched the map beneath her pillow, her father's initials whispering promises only she could hear. And then came the voices. She awoke to faint murmurs outside the window. Carefully, she slid from her bed and peeked through the thin curtains. The sheriff stood in the alley with one of his deputies, their figures half swallowed by shadows. She strained to hear. "Told you it's here somewhere," McGraw hissed. Clara's husband had the last piece of it. "He drew the damn thing. If the girl's got it, we take it. Understand?" The deputy's voice was nervous. But what if someone finds out? Folks already don't trust us. The sheriff grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You think I care what folks say? That map leads to more than gold. It leads to power. With it, I own this county. And if anyone stands in my way... His hand drifted to the revolver on his hip. Emily covered her mouth to keep from gasping. Her heart pounded so loud she feared they might hear it. Her father hadn't just drawn any map. He had drawn the map Sheriff McGraw had been hunting for years. The deputy muttered something Emily couldn't catch, but McGraw shoved him away with a growl. Keep your mouth shut and do your job. Tomorrow we start searching. The two men stalked off into the darkness, their footsteps fading, leaving Emily trembling. She crawled back into bed, curling around the parchment like it was a shield. Now she knew the truth. The sheriff wasn't just watching. He was planning. He would come for the map, and when he did, he wouldn't stop until he had it, no matter who he hurt. Emily pressed her eyes shut, whispering a prayer she had learned from her father long ago. God, give me courage. But even as the words left her lips, she realized courage alone might not be enough. She needed answers. She needed allies, and she needed to protect her father's secret before the sheriff's shadow swallowed everything she loved. The morning after overhearing the sheriff's chilling words, Emily sat on the porch steps, her knees tucked against her chest. The map was hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bed, but it felt as though it burned a hole through the house, calling out to anyone who passed. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Her father's initials, the strange symbols, the way Sheriff McGraw had spoken of power. Clara came outside with a basket of laundry, glancing at her daughter's pale face. Emily Rose, you look like you've seen a ghost. Emily wanted to tell her mother everything, but Clara already carried so many burdens. Since her husband's death, she had worked herself weary just to keep them fed. Emily feared that if she confessed, her mother might lose what little strength she still had. So Emily only whispered, I just didn't sleep well. Before Clara could press further, the sound of hooves broke the silence. A lone rider approached from the dusty road, his figure growing clear against the rising sun. He wasn't a townsman. His clothes were travel-stained, his hat wide-brimmed, his coat long and faded from the trail. He rode like a man who had been in the saddle for weeks. The horse stopped at the edge of their yard. The stranger dismounted slowly, his movements steady, cautious. He tipped his hat to Clara. Ma'am, he said, his voice gravelly but respectful. Name's Daniel Kane. I don't mean to trouble you, but I've been riding a long way. My horse needs water, and I could use a meal if you've got one to spare. Clara studied him warily. Life in Dry Creek had taught her not to trust too quickly, especially with Sheriff McGraw's eyes always watching. Yet something about Daniel's tone, humble, weary, and edged with quiet sadness, made her pause. She nodded reluctantly. Water's out back. I'll fetch you a plate. As Daniel led his horse toward the trough, Emily couldn't stop staring. His face was lined from sun and hardship, his eyes sharp and restless, as though they never stopped scanning the horizon. And when he glanced at her, she felt a jolt, like he could see straight through her, right to the secret she was hiding. Over lunch, Daniel spoke little. He ate with the hunger of a man who hadn't had a proper meal in days. But when his eyes lifted, they weren't the eyes of a simple drifter. They carried weight, knowledge, and something else Emily couldn't name, maybe regret. Finally, he said, This is good country. Dangerous, though. Folks talk about buried things out here. Things better left in the ground. Clara stiffened, her spoon halfway to her lips. What kind of things? Daniel shrugged, but his gaze flickered toward Emily, who immediately looked down. Maps, gold, secrets men would kill for. The room grew heavy with silence. Emily's heart pounded. How could he know? Did he somehow recognize her father's hand in the parchment? Clara forced a smile, trying to brush it off. Sounds like campfire tales. But Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping low. No tale, ma'am. I've seen blood spilled over less. Once, years back, I rode with men who chased such a map. A group of them found a way to mark the land. Hills, rivers, hidden canyons. Thought they'd struck fortune. Most of them never made it out alive. Emily's breath caught. The way he described it sounded exactly like her father's drawing. She couldn't hold her tongue any longer. Did you see the map yourself? She blurted. Clara shot her a warning look, but Daniel only studied the child. His expression softened. I saw part of it. Enough to know the hand that drew it was skilled. A man with knowledge of the land and a reason to hide what he found. Emily's pulse raced. She wanted to ask more, but Clara interrupted firmly. "That's enough, Emily. Mr. Kane, we thank you for your company, but we're not interested in outlaw stories." Daniel nodded, respecting her boundary. Yet as the meal ended, and Clara went to tend the laundry, Daniel lingered outside, leaning against the porch rail. Emily slipped out, her eyes wide with urgency. "You know about the map, don't you?" she whispered. Daniel studied her, his jaw tightening. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he crouched so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me, little one. If you've seen such a map, you keep it hidden. Don't show it to anyone, not even the sheriff, especially not him." Emily shivered. "He already knows." Daniel's expression darkened. He muttered a curse under his breath, scanning the horizon as though expecting the lawman to appear right then. "Sheriff McGraw's been hunting that map for years. Folks say he lost good men chasing it. If he's sniffing around, you're in more danger than you realize." Emily's throat tightened. "But it was my father's. He drew it, I think he wanted me to find it." Daniel's eyes softened, and for the first time Emily saw not just a drifter, but a man who had lost things too. Maybe family, maybe friends. He placed a calloused hand on her shoulder. "Then you've got a choice. Hold on to it and risk everything, or destroy it before the sheriff tears your life apart." Before Emily could answer, the sound of hooves thundered down the road. Sheriff McGraw rode into view, his deputy trailing behind. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. McGraw dismounted with a grin too wide, his boots crunching against the dirt. Well, what do we have here? A stranger making himself comfortable." Daniel straightened, his body coiled like a spring. "Just passing through, Sheriff. No trouble." The sheriff's eyes flicked between Daniel and Emily, sharp as a knife. Trouble has a way of finding its way here, especially when men go poking around where they don't belong. His tone was friendly on the surface, but Emily could feel the venom beneath. She clutched her skirt, praying he wouldn't search the house. The sheriff stepped closer to Daniel, his smile fading. "Best you keep riding, friend. Dry Creek doesn't take kindly to drifters." Daniel met his gaze without flinching. Maybe Dry Creek just doesn't take kindly to truth. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, tension crackling like lightning in a storm. Emily's heart hammered, sensing violence hovering just beneath the surface. But finally the sheriff chuckled coldly. "Suit yourself. Just don't say I didn't warn you." With that he mounted his horse and rode off, his deputy casting one last uneasy glance at the house. As the dust settled, Daniel turned to Emily and Clara. "He's watching you," he said quietly. "And if he thinks you've got what he wants, he won't stop until he has it." Emily swallowed hard. She already knew it was true. What she didn't know was how far the sheriff was willing to go, or how much blood would be spilled before the secret of the map was finally revealed. The night was restless in Dry Creek. The wind howled through the canyon beyond town, rattling shutters and stirring up whispers in the streets. Inside their modest home, Emily lay awake, the map hidden beneath the floorboard again. But even hidden, it seemed alive, like it pulsed with every beat of her heart. Daniel Kane hadn't left. Despite the sheriff's warning, he lingered nearby, sleeping in the barn with his horse. Clara didn't like it, but something in Emily trusted him. Maybe because he hadn't looked at her like a helpless child. He had looked at her like someone holding a dangerous secret, and like he knew exactly how heavy that burden could be. Around midnight, Emily crept to the barn, lantern in hand. Daniel was sitting awake, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. When he saw her, he set the blade aside. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "You know the sheriff wants the map." "But why? What's on it?" Daniel leaned back against a post, his expression shadowed. "Do you ever hear of the Keen Red Rock Gang bosses?" Emily frowned. The name sounded like a campfire tale. "Bad men," she whispered. "Mama said they robbed banks, stole horses, killed people." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's true. They were ruthless. But they weren't just thieves. They were treasure hunters. Years ago, near the end of the war, they discovered whispers of a fortune. Confederate gold lost in the desert canyons. Enough to buy a kingdom. They swore an oath, every man in that gang, that none of them would take it alone. They marked the land with a map, so only they could find it again." Emily's breath caught. "And my father?" Daniel's voice softened. "Your father, Jacob, Wasn't always the man your mama remembers. He rode with them once. He was the one who could draw, who mapped the rivers, the ridges, the caves. Without him, they'd have been lost. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to cry out that her father wasn't an outlaw, but deep down some part of her had always wondered about the secrets he never spoke of. Daniel continued, his tone heavy. But the Red Rock Gang turned on each other. Greed does that to men. Some died in shootouts, some vanished. The survivors scattered, but the map, it was never destroyed. Pieces of it changed hands, soaked in blood. Men killed friends and brothers for a glimpse of it. And the sheriff, his jaw tightened. Elias McGraw was one of them. Emily's stomach twisted. She pictured the sheriff's cold eyes, the way he stared at her house like it already belonged to him. He was part of the gang. Daniel nodded grimly. Not just part. He was their leader once. He swore the same oath, that no one could take the gold alone. But when the gang fell apart, he kept hunting year after year. Your father broke from them. He tried to leave that life behind. He drew the final map and hid it, swearing to protect you and Clara. That's why the sheriff wants it back. Without your father's peace, he's blind. And now that Jacob's gone, you're all that stands in his way. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She had always remembered her father as a kind man who tucked her in at night, who sang her soft songs in the barn. To imagine him once riding with killers bound by blood and greed, it shook her. And yet Daniel's words also explained everything. Why the sheriff watched them, why her father died so mysteriously, why she now held the key to something men had killed for. Clara appeared in the doorway then, her face pale but composed. She had overheard every word. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at Daniel as if deciding whether to throw him out or thank him for the truth. Finally she stepped forward. My husband swore to me he left that life behind, that he'd never spill another drop of blood for gold. Her voice trembled. Was his death the sheriff's doing? Daniel's eyes hardened. I can't prove it. But I'd bet my last breath on it. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears brimming. Emily ran to her mother, clutching her tightly. For a long time, silence filled the barn, broken only by the sigh of the wind. Finally, Clara whispered, "So what do we do?" Daniel's gaze drifted to the horizon. We stay ahead of him. We keep the map hidden. And when the time comes, we decide whether to destroy it or use it against him. But you need to know, McGraw won't stop. He's a man bound by an oath he twisted into obsession. He'll kill, burn, and break anything in his path until he has it. Emily shuddered. The sheriff's shadow seemed to stretch across the whole town, creeping into every corner of their lives. The next day, the sheriff made his presence known. He rode down Main Street with his deputy, his voice loud, his laughter sharp as a blade. He stopped at the saloon, bought drinks for half the town, told stories like he was their friend. But every glance, every word carried hidden weight. He asked questions about Clara, about Emily, about the drifter staying at their ranch. By nightfall, whispers spread through Dry Creek. Some said the sheriff was hunting bandits. Others said he was after buried gold. But Emily knew the truth. He was hunting her. That evening, Daniel returned from town with grim news. He's rallying men. Says he's forming a posse to catch outlaws hiding in the canyons. But it's a lie. He's going to use them to track the map. Clara's face drained of color. He means to search the land. Daniel nodded. And if he can't find it, he'll come straight here. Emily clutched her father's map, the parchment trembling in her hands. The inked lines seemed darker now, the symbols heavier, as though they carried not treasure, but the weight of every soul lost to greed. She looked up at Daniel and her mother, her voice small but steady. Then we can't stay here. We have to leave before he takes everything. For the first time, Daniel didn't argue. He only nodded. Then we leave at dawn. The desert will test us. Far better to face the desert than the sheriff's oath. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the barn doors. And in the sheriff's office across town, Elias McGraw sat alone polishing his revolver. His deputy tried to speak, but McGraw silenced him with a single look. Under his breath, the sheriff whispered words from long ago, the oath sworn in blood with the Red Rock Gang. No man keeps the gold alone. No man walks away. He smiled then, cruel and determined, because in his mind the oath was not broken, and soon neither Emily nor her mother would have anywhere left to hide. The desert waited for them at dawn, vast, silent, merciless. The horizon stretched forever. a sea of sand and stone shimmering under the rising sun. Emily had never left Dry Creek's outskirts before, but now, with her father's map tucked inside her satchel, she was riding into the unknown. Clara clutched the reins of their old mule-drawn cart, her jaw tight. Daniel rode alongside on horseback, scanning the horizon like a hawk. His revolver sat ready at his hip, his eyes sharp with the tension of a man who knew the sheriff would not be far behind. They travelled quickly, dust rising behind them. The town shrank until it was only a smudge against the sky. Emily kept glancing back, half expecting to see riders already on their heels. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down like a furnace. Sweat dripped down Daniel's temples. Clara's lips cracked. The mule staggered. The desert was no friend. It stripped strength with every mile. "Are we safe?" Emily asked finally, her voice small. Daniel shook his head. "Safe, not yet. McGraw's a tracker. He'll know we left. He'll follow sign, hoofprints, wagon wheels, broken brush. Only question is how soon he'll catch up." Clara's face paled, but she said nothing. She knew what it meant to be hunted. By noon, they reached a dry creek bed. Daniel led them down into the shade of its shallow banks. They watered the mule sparingly, shared a few sips of warm canteen water. Emily sat on a boulder, clutching the map. Her eyes traced the lines her father had drawn, trying to see through his eyes. The symbols seemed to point toward something beyond the canyon, a place no one else had dared to mark. Daniel crouched beside her. "What do you see?" Emily hesitated. "It looks like a path through the cliffs. Like he knew there was more than one way in." Daniel studied it, his brow furrowed. "Your pa was clever. Maybe he left you a way to outrun McGraw." Before Emily could answer, the sound of distant thunder rolled across the desert, not thunder from the sky, but from horses. Dust clouds rose on the horizon. Daniel's eyes went hard. "They've found us." He shoved the map back into Emily's satchel. "Ride, now!" Clara snapped the reins and the mule lurched forward. Daniel mounted swiftly, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. The chase had begun. The sheriff's posse closed fast, 6 riders kicking up a storm of dust. At the front rode McGraw, his face twisted in grim satisfaction. He raised a hand and the men behind him fanned out like wolves circling prey. Gunshots cracked through the air. Bullets whined past Emily's ears, splintering rocks, sending the mule braying in terror. She screamed and ducked low in the cart as Daniel fired back, his rifle echoing in sharp, deadly blasts. One of the sheriff's men toppled from his horse, rolling lifeless into the sand. The desert became chaos. Hooves thundered, gunfire roared, sand kicked into the air like smoke. Clara whipped the mule harder, desperation etched on her face. Emily clutched the map, her heart pounding, whispering to her father as though he could hear, "Show us the way. Please." Ahead, jagged cliffs rose from the desert floor, their shadows long and foreboding. Daniel shouted, "Into the canyon, go!" They plunged into the narrow pass, the cartwheels bouncing over stones, the mule straining with every pull. The canyon walls closed around them, towering high, funneling sound into a deafening roar. The sheriff's men followed, their shouts echoing like ghosts. Daniel twisted in the saddle, firing shot after shot to slow them. Another rider fell, but the others pressed on, relentless. Suddenly the sky darkened. A sandstorm swept in, wind howling, dust rising in choking clouds. The canyon filled with a swirling haze. Horses screamed, men cursed, shots went wild. Emily clung to the cart as grit stung her skin and filled her lungs. Daniel pulled his bandana over his face, shouting through the storm, "This is our chance! They'll lose sight of us." Clara guided the mule blindly, trusting only Emily's voice. The little girl clutched the map, squinting through stinging eyes. "Left, Mama. The rocks, there's a split ahead, go left." The cart lurched hard, nearly tipping, but Clara obeyed. They veered into a narrow side path, just as the storm swallowed the main canyon. Behind them, the sheriff's curses rose, muffled by the wind. Hours seemed to pass in the storm's grip, every step an eternity. When at last the winds died, they found themselves in a hidden gorge shielded from the worst of the storm. The silence was eerie, broken only by the mule's labored breathing. Clara collapsed against the reins, her hands raw from gripping leather. Emily slid down beside her, coughing, her face streaked with dust and tears. Daniel rode up slowly, his face grim but alive. "We lost some of them. But McGraw, he won't give up. He'll track us again." Emily looked at the map. The ink seemed darker now, the symbols almost alive. She pointed to a mark near the gorge. "Here, it's close. That's where he wanted us to go." Daniel studied it, then looked around the gorge. His expression shifted, caution mixed with something like awe. "If this is right, your pa didn't just hide treasure. He hid the truth." Clara's head lifted, her voice hoarse. "Truth?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Proof of what McGraw did. Records, names, maybe even stolen riches buried away. Enough to tear his whole world down." Emily's pulse raced. For the first time she realized this wasn't just about gold. This was about her father's legacy, about righting the wrongs McGraw had buried with blood and lies. But before hope could take root, the sound of a single shot cracked across the gorge. The bullet sparked against stone, narrowly missing Daniel's head. Emily screamed. Clara grabbed her daughter, pulling her down. At the mouth of the gorge, Sheriff McGraw appeared on horseback, his face twisted in fury, his eyes wild with obsession. His surviving men flanked him, rifles ready. "You think you can run from me?" McGraw's voice echoed like thunder through the gorge. He pointed his revolver straight at Emily. "Hand me the map, girl, or you'll watch your mother die." The desert was silent again, but the danger was louder than ever, and Emily knew the chase was far from over. The canyon walls towered high above, glowing orange in the dying light of evening. Shadows stretched long across the gorge, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Emily clutched the satchel tight to her chest, her small body trembling. Sheriff McGraw sat on his black stallion at the entrance, his hat low, his revolver aimed steady. Behind him, 3 of his remaining men held their rifles, waiting for his command. The silence was suffocating. Even the mules seemed frozen, ears back, sensing death in the air. Clara stood in front of Emily, her arms spread wide, shielding her daughter from the sheriff's gun. Daniel dismounted slowly, his hand hovering near his holster but not yet drawing. McGraw's voice cut through the stillness. "That map don't belong to you, girl. It's mine. Your pa stole it, and I aim to take back what's owed." Emily's chest heaved. "That's not true," she cried. "Papa left it for us. He wanted us to know." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Your pa, John Rose? He was a fool. Thought he could cross me. Thought he could dig into matters that didn't concern him. That map was never his. It was mine from the start. He died because he couldn't understand that." Clara's knees weakened, but she forced her voice steady. "For you killed him." McGraw tipped his head, neither confirming nor denying, but his silence screamed guilt. Clara's hand trembled against Emily's shoulder, her heart shattering all over again. Daniel finally spoke, his tone like flint striking steel. "That map ain't treasure, is it, McGraw?" "It's proof. Proof of what you've done." The sheriff's grin faltered. His hand tightened on the revolver. "Careful, boy. You don't know what you're meddling in." But Emily knew. Her father's careful marks, the strange symbols, the notes scribbled in the margins, it wasn't just land routes. It was ledgers, burial spots, hidden caches. Every mark told a story of stolen gold shipments, ambushes on travelers, secrets buried in shallow graves. It was evidence of McGraw's crimes. "You took everything," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but loud enough to echo in the canyon. "You ruined our lives. But Papa was smarter than you. He left this so everyone would know the truth." The sheriff's face darkened. "Enough talk. Hand it over." He cocked the revolver, aiming at Clara. Emily cried out, but Daniel's gun cleared leather first. A thunderclap of gunfire erupted. McGraw's revolver fired at the same instant. The canyon filled with chaos. Daniel's bullet struck one of McGraw's men, who toppled from his horse with a scream. McGraw's shot grazed Clara's arm, spinning her to the ground. Emily screamed and dropped to her knees beside her mother. Daniel dove for cover behind a boulder, returning fire. The sheriff's men fanned out, their rifles spitting fire into the fading light. Sparks rained from the canyon walls as bullets ricocheted. Dust and smoke filled the gorge, choking the air. Emily dragged the satchel beneath her mother's body, shielding it with everything she had. Tears blurred her vision. Mama, stay with me." Clara's face was pale, her breath shallow, but she forced a trembling hand to cup Emily's cheek. Don't let him win." Rage burned in Emily's chest. She rose to her feet, clutching the map, her small body silhouetted against the canyon glow. "You'll never have it," she shouted at McGraw. The sheriff snarled, urging his stallion forward. He fired again, the bullet sparking inches from her feet. "You think a child can stop me? I own this town, this land, this whole desert. Daniel's rifle cracked again, striking another of McGraw's men. The canyon echoed with his scream before silence swallowed him whole. Only one outlaw remained, his aim wild, fear breaking his resolve. McGraw, furious, turned his revolver on Daniel. "I'll gut you where you stand." But Daniel didn't flinch. He reloaded quick, his eyes never leaving McGraw. "Come on then. Let's end this," the sheriff roared, spurring his horse forward. Dust flew as he bore down on Daniel. Their guns fired almost in unison, explosions shattering the air. The sheriff's stallion reared, shrieking. McGraw toppled from the saddle, hitting the ground hard, his revolver spinning out of reach. Daniel staggered back, a crimson stain spreading across his shoulder. Emily, heart-pounding, stared as McGraw scrambled in the dirt, clawing toward his gun. His eyes burned with hatred, madness consuming him. "Give it to me," he roared. "It's mine! It's all mine!" Emily clutched the map tighter, her small hands trembling. She looked at her mother, who whispered through her pain, "Run." But Emily didn't run. She stepped forward, facing the sheriff, her fear swallowed by something stronger, her father's voice inside her heart. "You can't bury the truth," she said. Her voice was steady now, filled with a strength beyond her years. "Papa lives through this map, and everyone will know what you did." McGraw lunged for his revolver. Daniel, bleeding and barely standing, raised his rifle one last time. A single shot rang out. The sheriff's body jerked, then collapsed onto the canyon floor. Silence fell, broken only by the echo of the gunshot rolling away into the desert night. Emily stood frozen, the map clutched to her chest. The sheriff's shadow, which had loomed over Dry Creek for years, was finally broken. But as she looked down at his lifeless form, she knew the battle wasn't over. His men, his allies, his corruption, they all remained. Daniel limped toward her, wincing with pain, his voice rough. "He's finished. But the truth, that's still your fight." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face but her eyes burning with determination. She had the map. She had her father's legacy. And she would see it through no matter what it cost. The canyon was quiet again, but for Emily, the world had changed forever. Dawn crept slowly into the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and rose. The air was cool now, soft with the promise of a new day, yet heavy with the weight of what had passed. Sheriff McGraw's body lay still in the dust, the echo of his tyranny finally silenced. His stallion grazed quietly nearby, no longer carrying the burden of a corrupt man. Emily stood over the fallen sheriff, the satchel clutched tight against her chest. Her small hands trembled, but her eyes were fierce. She wasn't just a frightened child anymore. Something inside her had changed. She had faced down the monster, who had destroyed her father and nearly torn her family apart. And she had not broken. Clara leaned against a rock, her wounded arm bound with strips of cloth. Pain lined her face, but her gaze never left her daughter. Pride glimmered in her tired eyes. "You were brave, Emily," she whispered. "Braver than anyone I've ever known." Emily knelt beside her, tears threatening. "I was so scared, Mama, but I heard Papa's voice. I think he wanted me to finish what he started." Clara touched her cheek with a trembling hand. "He'd be proud." "So proud." Daniel staggered closer, his own shoulder wrapped in makeshift bandages. Blood stained his shirt, but he stood tall, his rifle slung across his back. His voice carried the gravel of exhaustion, but also respect. "That map's more than paper, Emily. It's a weapon, a different kind than guns or knives. With it, you can destroy everything McGraw built. Expose every lie, every theft, every name he covered up." Emily opened the map carefully, the parchment fragile in the early light. Her father's handwriting stretched across its edges, not just landmarks but notes, dates, accounts. Gold shipments that had vanished, travelers ambushed, townsfolk cheated, all tied to McGraw. Her father hadn't died chasing treasure. He had died chasing the truth. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "We can show everyone. The judge, the townspeople, even the governor. They'll see what he did." Daniel nodded grimly. "But it won't be easy. McGraw had allies. Men in high places, men who won't want this truth to see daylight. They'll come for you, just like he did." Clara's face hardened. "Then let them come. We'll be ready." For the first time since her father's death, Emily saw strength in her mother's eyes. Not just the strength to survive, but to fight. They buried McGraw in the canyon where he fell, a simple grave marked with a pile of stones. Emily placed a single wildflower on top, her hand steady. "This is where your lies end," she whispered, "and where Papa's truth begins." The journey back to Dry Creek was long and weary. The desert, once a place of fear, now seemed alive with possibility. The wind carried whispers of freedom. Emily rode beside her mother and Daniel, the map secure in her hands. She didn't feel like a child anymore. She felt like the keeper of something far greater. When they reached the edge of town, word had already spread. People gathered in the streets, murmuring, eyes wide with questions. They saw Clara's wound, Daniel's blood, Emily's fierce gaze, and they knew something had changed. At the courthouse, Emily stood before the judge, the mayor, and the townsfolk. With trembling hands, she unrolled the map. Her small voice carried louder than anyone expected as she told the story. Of her father's discovery, of McGraw's corruption, of the night in the canyon when the sheriff's reign ended. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Faces that had once bowed in fear now lifted in anger and resolve. Men whispered about justice. Women held their children closer, realizing the shadow over Dry Creek had finally lifted. The judge examined the map with grave eyes. This is evidence enough to open every locked door McGraw left behind. His allies will fall. His empire will crumble. Emily's heart swelled. For the first time she saw hope flicker across the town, a hope her father had died for, and she had carried forward. But when the applause began, when the people cheered her name, Emily didn't smile. Instead, she whispered to herself, "This isn't about me. It's about Papa, about the truth." That night, as the stars spread across the sky, Emily sat on the porch of their small house. Clara rested inside, her wound healing slowly. Daniel stood nearby, watchful but at ease. The town was quieter now, safer. Emily unfolded the map once more, tracing her father's lines under the starlight. She realized there were still places on it she hadn't yet explored, secrets buried deeper than even McGraw had known. Perhaps one day she would follow those trails. Perhaps her father had left more than just justice. Perhaps he had left mysteries yet to be uncovered. She pressed the parchment to her chest, whispering into the night, "I'll keep your legacy, Papa. I'll make sure the truth never dies." And though the wind carried no answer, Emily felt him there, in the rustle of the grass, in the glow of the stars, in the strength that now lived in her own heart. The little girl who once stumbled upon a saddlebag in a dusty barn was gone. In her place stood a guardian of truth, forged by loss, courage, and love. The legend of the map had only just begun.